Good evening, everyone. Oh, well, I think we need to, okay, here we go. I'm Marianne Brownlow. Welcome to Hill Center at the Old Naval Hospital. Who is here for the very first time? Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming, and please come back. We do so many wonderful programs here. Lectures, conversations, concerts, all sorts of different things. But we're so pleased to once again welcome the Jenny McKean Moore Community, reading here this evening with two very distinguished writers, Chow, who is actually the Jenny McKean Moore Community teacher this year, and Jung. Our partner, East City Bookshop, is out with books by both of them that are for sale. There'll be a book signing afterwards, and very much looking forward to this conversation. So please welcome Kat and Jung.
Thank you. Hooray. Thank you for that intro, and thank you everyone for coming. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces.
Yay.
Yay.
Thanks again. This is such a beautiful space, and we're so lucky that the Hill Center always has us here with the Jenny McKean Moore writer. Just to get started, because we have so limited time together, I was on the search committee for the Jenny McKean Moore writer the year that we were successful in recruiting Kat to GW. And I remember I was just telling you that I was reading all the finalists' work over one very long weekend, and I came to a part of Seeing Ghosts where your mother talks about wanting to be stuffed after she passes away. I won't do justice to the scene or the descriptions. I was wondering, since it is such an important part of the book, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the context of that conversation.
Yes. So basically this is this is like the main premise of the book, or kind of what seeded a lot of the structure of the book. So when I was a small child, before I had even known that my mother was terminally ill or sick, she was a woman who had a really playful sense of humor. And she made a joke that when she passed, she wanted to be with me always in my future apartment, and therefore wanted to be stuffed and wanted me to get her taxidermied. And that was such a bizarre thing to say to a child. And I was deeply afraid of anything dead, and that just stuck with me so viscerally. It was really, creepy. And actually, Jung, when you bring that up, it reminds me that telling the story verbally makes it sound so much darker than it actually was. I actually was telling a stranger about this as I was writing the book, and there was a moment where she paused and she looked at me and she said, "Is your mom in your house now?" And I had to be like, "No, it's a metaphor."
Well, that was the moment. I talk to my students, and I see a lot of students' faces here. We talk about the moment of yes in a book where, as a reader, you decide, like, okay, I'm in. I like what I'm reading. I'm engaged. I want to see where this is going. And I remember having this very guilty reaction of, like, both laughing at that moment and also thinking, like, that's heartbreaking and sweet. Like, the fact that she loved you so much that she wanted to watch over you.
Yes, yes. Such misguided love.
But that was definitely a moment of yes. But I wanted to go backwards a little bit. The writer Matthew Bell talks about the concept of the shadow novel. It's the book that we write before we figure out the book that we actually want to write. And I understand that you first started approaching Seeing Ghosts as a novel.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how it evolved into the memoir that it is.
Yes. So I was just writing so many variations of the story of my family's loss, since my mother died, whether it was through journaling or through, this is maybe before some of your times, but when Zanga or live blogging or live journal was a thing. And I would just write a lot about loss. And then I realized, in fiction, I have so much more freedom to create a character named like Allie who has a very curious life that resembles my own, but it departs from it. And so in college, actually, I had just read The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz, and that it had just come out, and it was so formative to me because there was this Dominican American speaker who had this visceral, exciting, playful, funny, bizarre voice that reached at something deep within me, like some emotion that I knew I wanted to chase because it spoke to me. And so in my novel, I wrote this very fictionalized version of this speaker who had a ghost mother. But I put it down. It was like my thesis project. My poor professors read drafts of it, and I would go to their office hours and I'd be like, what did you think of the novel? And my American Studies professor, Leilani Nishime, who I still am in touch with, she'd be like, well, Kat, I did read it. And in retrospect, I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. But that, putting in that repetition, those reps for figuring out how to tell that story, figuring out what pacing, that's what led me to this.
But what was the evolution? Like, was there more comfort in approaching it as a fictional story? And then when did it make the turn to your own family, your own relatives?
I actually think in college, it was really more fixated on Asian American identity, trying to figure out what does it mean to be Asian American? Because those were questions I was grappling with at the time. There was a made up boyfriend character, and there was a love interest that was not, it's not anything that's really included in the book. And I think that there was a comfort in trying to tell a story that was really hard. It was my way of kind of looking away. And I actually found that draft of the book, when I was done writing Seeing Ghosts. And I had forgotten that I had spent so many years in college working on it. And I had forgotten that it actually, some of the premise of the ghost actually hewed very closely to what I wound up doing. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, so the ghost story remained.
Okay. So there are so many things in this book, so many motifs and symbols and metaphors that I found myself really gravitating toward, and the ideas about inheritance and debt, what do we owe our ancestors. One of the anecdotes, the memories that really stands out to me is your mother's headstone and the story surrounding the headstone. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, the humor, but also the bittersweet aspects of that process.
So my mother was buried in a cemetery not far from my aunt's house in Fairfield, Connecticut. And for I think a few years actually, from the time when she passed when I was 13 to after college, I believe, her grave was unmarked because my family just simply could not afford a headstone. But also it might not have just been money. And this was something that I was trying to puzzle over in Seeing Ghosts, where initially we had a headstone installed, but my sister Steph and my sister Caroline and I had all designed it together, and we were excited. This was a family project. My sisters are both very type A, and Steph took out a piece of paper and was hand drawing things on the headstone. We were putting a lot on it. My mom loved fish and Chinese culture. Fish are good. There were bamboo pieces on it, and my sister Steph has really beautiful handwriting, but she was only probably 22 at the time, and I was 13, and they sent it in to the gravestone designer, and the headstone that was installed at the cemetery was installed and engraved basically with Comic Sans font. And so my dad and I showed up at the cemetery, and I just remember crying and saying that it was the ugliest thing. And my poor father, who, we had a very hard relationship because he didn't really know what to do suddenly with this 13-year-old. He didn't say anything at the time, but then just refused to pay the headstone company. So her grave was unmarked for many, many years. And I just never knew why. And my dad, if I asked him why, he would probably say, like, Jung, if you called him up right now, he would probably tell you that it's because I had that big reaction. And in my eyes, I'm like, well, maybe we couldn't afford it, or maybe, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it was all of our grief interacting. But that became really a big moment for me, this unmarked grave, right? Because that's also just bad spiritually.
In the book, that is one of the appearances of your mother, the ghost, in ghost form.
Yes.
And I think that is such an interesting presence throughout the entire book. When did ghosts start to form kind of the structure of telling this story?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it formed when I realized that this book, which was very sprawling in its idea, could be told through a ghost story. So as in Chinese culture, there's this idea that if you don't do all of these rituals after somebody has died, then their spirit is very restless and will always be roaming the earth. And that's something that I remember one of my aunts saying, and that really frightened me, even though I wasn't even sure we believed in ghosts as a family, but I knew that I was like a scaredy cat as a kid. And so I would always just have these visions of like, oh no, we didn't do XYZ thing, or oh no, her grave is unmarked. Is she there? Is she mad? Is she upset? Does she think this moment is funny? And as a storyteller, though, as a writer, I was like, this is gold. This allows me to sort of pull us away from nonfiction into an element that is fictional, and it gives me a lot of power as a writer. But it also sets up a quest of this ghost has all of these unfulfilled things that need to be accomplished by the end of the book.
Your mother she's just such, I hesitate to call her a character because she's your mother, but to me, she's a character who's just so incredibly vivid. Her sense of humor is amazing. Her sense of mischievousness is, and there's a thing that she used to do to you in public restrooms.
Oh my gosh. In public restrooms, my mother would, and actually this is funny that I keep saying me, because usually I feel like I'd be like the speaker, but we can just say me. Me in public restrooms, when you're on a road trip and you're going to a gas station or a rest stop bathroom, I'd have climbed up onto the toilet seat and would be going to the bathroom, and my mom would be on the other side of the stall, and she would reach under and grab my ankles just to scare me.
The reason why I'm so fixated on that is my mom did that too.
Really?
Yes.
So bad.
This is an insane thing to do to somebody in a public space.
I mean, what if you reach over into the wrong stall, right? There are moments where I find myself wanting to do that to my sisters.
Yes.
Or maybe now even to continue the cycle of trauma her children. But I'm like, no, that's inappropriate now. I would get arrested.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, but I was telling Kat in the green room that my husband saw me during various stages of reading your book, and I would be laughing in one moment, and then there are just devastating moments where I would be crying, and that's unusual for me. And he'd be like, are you reading the same thing? And that's one of the things that I really appreciated about this book, because my understanding of it when I picked it up is that it's a book about grief, and I didn't expect the humor, the surprises, the history lessons as well, that were all part of it.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to make a book about loss that wasn't so buttoned up, but that was still just, I don't know, showed a worldview. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about research?
Sure.
Okay. So as you all know, Kat was one of the founding members of the NPR Code Switch team, and I see how deeply reported sections of this book are. There's a section on communist China, there's Chinese migration to Cuba, there's even a history lesson that kind of on Hartford. And I guess the thing that I really wanted to ask most is that you spent a lot of time interviewing subjects who were willing, or at least willing enough to say yes to an interview. But interviewing family feels like a different thing. And if you could tell us a little bit about the process of interviewing some of your more willing or less willing family members.
Yeah. I remember it required so much setup. So first explaining what it was that I was trying to do. So I sold my book on a proposal. And so that means that I had the book deal before I had really written it, which is very scary. And my book would not be what it became if my family hadn't been so willing. And how I got there was through, I had been publishing essays and I had been reporting sort of for a long time prior to selling the book. So they knew and they could understand what I was interested in and how I could tell a story, and also how I was writing personal essays. And I think it took the level of, I had written an essay about my mom and finding a pair of her shoes in my father's house. My father hoards a lot of his belongings. And like the benefit of that is that a lot of my mom's stuff was still in his house. And I wrote this essay about just the impact that had on me. And my dad, he read that, and this was like by now like 12 years ago or so. He then immediately after reading it came out of the closet with more of her stuff for me. And I was just so touched by that. And he also said, maybe you gals, referring to me and my sisters, can come and like clean out her closet or go through her stuff. He didn't say clean out the closet, but he said go through her stuff, which was a really big deal because she had been dead by then for like a decade and a half. So I think I understood that writing in a way could actually mean something to my family and my own real life, even if in my head I was creating this like almost fictional thing. And so in getting my family to talk to me, it was a lot of being like, I want to tell this story right. And it was a lot of humility too. Is anyone here the youngest child in their family? Okay. Yeah. So, birth order in my family is real. I am the youngest sister, which means that often I am the one who is still seen as the 13-year-old I was when my mother passed. And so a lot of it was trying to show my sisters and show my dad that I could do this, and that I was going to treat our family story with care. Yeah.
But there was some reconciliation of differing memories,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Was there one in particular that kind of surprised you, the way that you misremembered something, possibly?
I think I had to. So there was a lot about, my brother. So I had a brother who was born 2 years before me, who was a stillborn. And sort of like the lore in my family is that if he had not passed, I would not have been alive, or I would not have been born. And so that was always like this very strange tension for me. And I didn't know anything about Jonathan because when my mom was alive, that was way too painful to talk about. And my dad, just like, I could have never imagined asking him about that. And then when I did, I think I just, I was really taken by his impression of it because it was also, different than what my sisters remembered. We kind of I pieced together the days around his death and, well, I guess his birth and his death just a few hours later. And my sisters remembered different moments and my dad remembered different moments. And of course, like the missing narrative is my mother, right? And but in being able to stitch all of that together, I was able to kind of say like, this is what so-and-so remembers, or this is like so-and-so's version, because like the narrative that we tell as nonfiction writers is never it's not the whole encompassing thing. It is one part. And so I wanted to be very careful about that in my memoir, because I mean, I am a journalist, and that's something that I wanted to give my family the grace to have. Yeah.
Your brother, Jonathan, is buried in a cemetery in Hartford, and your research led you to someone else who is also buried in Hartford. And I was wondering that might lead to the excerpt that you've chosen.
Yes. Do we want an excerpt? Yeah, okay. I will. I hope it's not going to be boring. No, it's not. I love having a captive audience. Okay. So this is partway through the book after my mom has passed. My father held the square tin as though it were a gift he had just received. His elbows bent, box in both hands just below his chest. As he approached the van where Steph and I waited, it looked for a moment like he wanted to shake the container to determine if it held a watch, a candle, a glass figurine. In reality, it was a canister of ash and bone fragments, a debt he owed to his dead wife. A month after her funeral, the three of us were at Cedar Hill so that my family could pay for Jonathan's remains to be disinterred, then cremated. Steph and I waited for our father in the car, not speaking as we watched the smoke drift from the building's chimney and fade into the trees. I wondered who we were witnessing take on another form. At home, Steph and I took turns standing at the microwave to reheat bowls of a thin broth with pork bones, boiled mustard greens, and winter melon. We ate these without speaking, spooning rice into our soup and slurping loudly, with visible, audible relief. Afterward, the TV still blasting the nightly business report with Paul Kangas, our father carried the tin with Jonathan's ashes to the family room. But for the next decade, my parents' only son would sit at the base of the fireplace behind a jungle of wilted and rotted plants. Watching my father clutch his son's ashes, I understood the weight of what he held. One can grieve a person, a place, or ideal. All of those things have heft. The word itself, grieve, comes partially from the Latin gravere, to make heavy, cause grief. Heavy, like the realization his wife and son were not ready to leave their lives behind, that each of us was scared of death and all that it would bring, that with it, our sense of home, the people who made it, the paperwork that codified it, could easily be upended. Freud wrote famously about mourning and melancholia. These two types of grief were distinct from one another, he posited in an essay from 1917. Mourning had an end in sight. A person in mourning had a grief that adhered to a specific person or object. But melancholia was an ongoing state, pathological almost. The melancholic may know they have lost something, but not exactly what they have lost. The scholar Anne Anlin Cheng puts it this way in The Melancholy of Race. The melancholic eats the lost object, feeds on it, as it were. Eats, feeds, as though those who have internalized loss become ravenous in their hunger for sustaining their grief. It bloats them, but they continue to feast. Perhaps instead of asking if I'm exorcising or taxidermizing you, I should ask if really I'm taxidermizing myself. What within my grief am I afraid to lose? It's the idea of you, of course. Here, so many years later, I can't shake your death and don't want to in the first place. Eats, feeds, insatiable. But Cheng's broader argument is that identity formation, and racial identity formation in particular, is melancholic itself and is shaped by the push-pulls of loss and recovery. I get this. The immigrant family tries to preserve a history and a life that the surroundings resist. They try to invent a new way of being while always seeking a home within the negative space. I find this melancholy in the story of young Wing, who was buried in Cedar Hill not far from where Jonathan first rested. So many historians tout Jung's first. He was the first Chinese immigrant to graduate from Yale. That he wrote that what was arguably the first Chinese-American memoir, before a Chinese-American identity was called such. But it is Jung's existence in Connecticut and the question of his belonging I find most compelling. As a child, it was hard for me to imagine anyone alive centuries ago in Connecticut who looked like my family. Wethersfield's Borders had placards that delighted in how it was established in 1634 and therefore the most ancient town in the state. It was impossible for me to feel as though my family, or anyone who looked like us, had roots here. We felt so isolated and new and had no community outside our relatives. While at Yale, Young Wing was granted American citizenship, which was unusual in that era, considering many Chinese immigrants in the American West were denied such, and the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 would make that xenophobia and racism law. It was perhaps, as some scholars argue, the privileges and proximity to whiteness that a prestigious institution like Yale afforded Young. Still, Young struggled to find work after graduation. His sponsors had hoped that, following his time at Yale, he would return to China to continue their mission work. The scholar Robert G. Lee once made a distinction about immigrants. A foreigner was innocuous and temporary. An alien had no desire to leave and was therefore considered a threat. I had previously considered both labels, foreigner, alien, to be similarly derogatory, practically synonyms, because they both served to otherize immigrants. But an immigrant's permanence so quickly can eradicate any veneer of welcome. Okay, and then I'm going to skip to this other portion. Not long after we brought Jonathan's ashes home, my father dragged his headstone from the van to the backyard while I was at school. I hadn't noticed that we brought the marker from the cemetery in the first place. My father must have returned to Cedar Hill by himself to retrieve it. He deposited the stone near our back deck in one of the overgrown garden beds clogged with bull thistle and cheatgrass. He likely moved efficiently, not pausing to allow any sentimentality to seep through. He did not bow. He did not offer any words to his son. After all, it was a tombstone that marked nothing. After all, his son's ashes were inside our home to be buried later at his wife's grave. I discovered the headstone later that week when I hauled the garbage cans through the yard to the street. Jonathan's marker sat flat in the garden bed. Whoa! I jerked back and barreled into the house. You put Jonathan's gravestone back there? Hey, my father said. Where else would I put it? He didn't want it inside, and I couldn't blame him. That would just invite trouble. It just looks like, I said, waving my hands, flustered. I don't know. It just looks like you buried him there. It looks like a grave. Whether my father could or would acknowledge it, he cultivated his grief this way. He let the vines stretch thick and run amok over his son's stone. There was something stunning in how the vegetation persisted, the whole scene so easily confused for decay.
So I'm glad that that excerpt ended with your dad, because I'm fascinated by your dad. I've told Kat this many times. Whenever you stop by my office, our dads are so similar. It's uncanny. And I just wanted to read this excerpt. This is your dad saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. My father frequently deploys these words when confronted with facts or questions that he doesn't want to acknowledge. They are his defense and armor. He doesn't know, or he doesn't want to know. I can never tell. You had made the comment that this book was about your mom, but it's also very much about your dad, like surprisingly more about your dad than you thought.
Yes.
And but he's reacted well to this. Like,
yeah.
I'm just curious, like, how, when a person says that they don't know, and that's often their response to things, how do you interview and elicit memory and information from someone who takes that approach?
Yeah, so in journalism, I was taught that if they don't answer the question, then you ask it in another way, and then you ask it in another way, and another way, and another way, and another way, and then maybe their non-answer is an answer. And so I guess my journalism background taught me that maybe there is meaning to make in what my dad doesn't say. No, but really, yeah, getting to interview him over and over and over again, I think he actually enjoyed the audience of me, right? Because this was a moment where I could reach out to him as his daughter and say, I care about our family history, and I also care about what you have to say, which I I don't think he had really ever felt in his life before. And so it was actually really moving. It improved our relationship so much, in a way that, like I write in my acknowledgments where I thank him for sharing so much and being so vulnerable. Even if he, comes off in a way that some people were surprised that like he would let me write about him in such a way. I thanked him and I said, I need to call you more often now that I don't have this excuse. And so I think my dad is such a matter-of-fact person where he was very much of the mindset of like, okay, like, sure. I mean, he read that novel actually that I wrote in college. Sitting here, I actually just remembered that. And he told me, it just seems like this is your life. And it's just like everything that happened in your life. And I was like, this is fiction. Also, how dare you tell me there's no plot? So actually, though, when he read Seeing Ghosts for the first time, he read it when my publisher bound a copy for him. And he had sent me an email that just said, like, your book in the subject line. Actually, I read it as your book, like I was about to get yelled at, in like a really long email. And it was just a list of page numbers and all the things I got wrong. But it was like rendered in a loving way where it was like for Micah instead of XYZ material that the kitchen counter is made out of. I was in the car here. And just so I was like, oh, he really took a lot of time to read this. I know.
I have a couple more questions and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A. You talked about your acknowledgments, and one of the things that I noticed in your acknowledgments is that it's long. Like you had a community of people who mentored you, who were your peers in the writing of this. I know that mentoring is really important to you because you started a program at NPR. What advice do you have for people who are trying to build community around their own writing, looking for mentors around their own writing, after they graduate?
Oh, should I ask my students who are the undergraduates, especially who are in this audience, what I've been hoping that they will do? Yeah. Okay. They said writing group. I genuinely hope that, like building that community of writers, getting that writing group going, is something that everyone can find. I have like some of my closest friends are writers, they're journalists, they're memoirists. And if it had not been for them reading these shadow copies of this book when it just felt like garbage, or when it felt like, I don't know, a really terrifying Word document of word salad, who told me, no, there's something here, or I don't think you should include that, or I think this is for your next book, or yes, keep going. I think having that backstop was so important because when you're sort of in the publishing industry, I was so scared that here I have my family's story. I only have one opportunity to tell it, which probably is not true, but here my publisher is, and I loved them. They were wonderful, but their end game is to have a book out in the world that, is a product. It is something for sale. And my end game was to like make art or to do something beautiful or to do something that would do my family right. And so my best friends and my writer friends were the ones who were, they know my taste. They know like the ambition of the book, and they were sort of, there to push me. And so that's why I will always I'm so indebted to my friends. Anytime they need me to read anything, I'm like, yes, like just send it to me now. And I will like give you line edits. I will do that.
Actually, I lied. I have one last question.
Yes.
Where do you go from here? Like, what are you working on now?
Oh, I'm trying to write fiction, which is very much a different part of my brain. I think that I am. So when I write, I always chase feelings, and the feeling that I was trying to chase for a while with one project, and this is all I'll say about it now, is just the idea of extinction of self. And so that was one theme. But I'm also working on another nonfiction book project about language and reclaiming a language that one might have grown up speaking but doesn't anymore, which feels, which feels necessary right now in this political moment.
Yeah, very
That's
necessary.
all we'll say there.
Okay. Do folks have questions for Kat? Ben?
Oh.
I was sort of wondering, especially like grading your memoir, like what was the emotional process for you? Like were you able as a writer to be like, well, I'm producing this memoir, this book is going somewhere, to able to separate that from whatever like was coming up as you were creating?
Yeah, no, it was really hard. There were moments where I would get so panicked that I would be like, how do I get out of this book contract? And like never seriously, right? Just like the fear side of my brain of like, you cannot do this. Just like, you don't have the skill, you don't have the talent. Like that little voice that just says it's bad. That paired with like the stakes of doing something so personal made me so afraid, while also, you know, like sometimes I would have a conversation with my family that was just sad and upsetting. So actually therapy, like to be, very honest, like therapy, and then had a family therapy session that was very stressful, but, I have a close relationship with my sisters, and writing something that was about family that I felt like they for sure would always love me no matter what was what helped. And honestly, just being constantly affirmed by my writing friends. So, I mean, I'm sure I was like very needy, but it was such a like fragile state for a few years. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, constructing a narrative from my own memory. So I had that driving question that Jung mentioned, which is, what do you owe? And I used that to set up the ghost story, which, you know, we talked about, where I knew that in the narrative, there were multiple things that had to happen. Like my mother's ghost her spirit had to be fulfilled, which was to have my brother buried in a different cemetery. I knew that my father would have to fulfill his own family quest, and that also like me as a character would have to fulfill something too, which was like maybe like it was like understanding of loss or like family or something. So from like that gave me kind of a plot device or like a structure, and as far as memories go, everything, like every memory I chose had to kind of be in service of that question of what do you owe? So whether that's financial, whether that's like out of filial duty where, you know, the child has to really pay respect to the elders, something. And so all of the scenes or moments in the book, I could make the argument that they respond to that question. Yeah.
You know, Ruth's question just reminded me that something that I wanted to ask you about was the nonlinear structure of the narrative.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what makes the book work so incredibly well. Was it always written in this nonlinear format, or did you rearrange a lot of it?
Yeah, it was always written in the nonlinear format because I love nonlinear books. But I also felt as though it spoke to just the feeling of grief where a different memory is resurrected and you're like, where did that come from? Sometimes I think about if I wrote this book now, would I try and make it linear? And I just don't know how I would. It would still have, you know, a lot of flashbacks probably. And so I don't really know, like, I don't think that could be for me as compelling or something that I am equipped to do. But I loved just the echoes of grief. Yeah. Any other questions?
Question.
Yes.
Back to the earlier question about how did your book about your mom become a book also about your dad?
Yes.
When you framed the book, when you sold the book, the proposal, did you have the idea that it would also include your dad, his story about his, I think, father who migrated to Cuba, or
Yeah.
kind of evolve again?
That's a great question, David. And David is one of the students in my Jenny McKean Moore community class. And I love your writing. So the question was about, whether I had always known. I think I was resistant to having his story be so central because I was afraid. I kept thinking, my father is still alive. I don't know if he wants to be written about. And yet at the same time, like, I don't really understand why all of these editors who I'm meeting in these meetings are saying that this is a really compelling story. I remember one of the comps that my book had been compared to, or that it could be compared to, was Patricia Lockwood's Priest Daddy, which I've had, I can't remember if I've assigned this yet, because there was something so, it was like a character study on the father. And I was really resistant to that because I thought that there were parts of my dad and my family that still needed protection. But it was having to tell my family's story and realizing that I also needed that that branch of the family tree that came from him too. That was really big. But I thought it was going to be minor, right? I had written about Cuba. So my grandfather on my dad's dad was actually, he passed and he died in Cuba, and he was one of many of thousands of Chinese men to leave China in the 1920s or 30s to work in Havana. And he ended up dying there. And my dad just didn't have a chance to ever meet his father or repatriate those bones to China or elsewhere. And so a big part of, doing things in my own life related to my mom, like putting the tombstone in or fulfilling her last wishes, also made me realize like I need to help my father do this too. And so I think naturally in that process of writing about my mother, I turned and I looked at my real life, at my remaining parent, and I thought I need to kind of repair this relationship. And then also there's something so moving about writing about this man too, who I have come from. I don't know if that answered the question, but I was quite resistant to having so much of the story be about him at first. And that's what made me so afraid. And then finally I accepted it. And I think, like it made the story for me.
Can I just read a quick quote really quick about your dad?
Yeah.
This was the quote that made me lose it. And my husband's like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "No, I'm not okay." This is you interviewing your dad in the car. "Are you happy?" Silence. My father looks down. He glances out his window. His jaw twitches. For some reason, I stop filming and put my phone down. I just like, and it's so incredibly generous of your father to allow this to exist in a space, because that's such a private and intimate glimpse of him.
And that was a transcript. So there's one chapter that's just a transcript of this video I took of him. It's still like the first thing. Every time I get a new iPhone, it's somehow still in my iCloud. It's from 2009, and I was in college. I think I was a sophomore. I had come home on a winter break. He's driving me from Connecticut to Providence in his minivan. He's wearing his like mittens, and I'm in the passenger seat. And I'm like, I had just taken an Asian American Studies class. I thought I was so smart, asking my father about Asian American identity and like how he identifies. And he was so patient, but also just like, "Are you happy?" Who asks that? Like, I don't know. If anyone asked me that now, I'd be like, wow. So yeah, he was actually quite generous. Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good question. I also want to hear your answer. So the question was, writing something so personal and so hard. Now I'm going to summarize it. Sorry. How did you know you were done? How did you know it was what you wanted it to be, that it was, I think, maybe good enough? This really scared me. So in general, I have like deadline anxiety. As a journalist, that's a really bad thing. Anytime I would get assigned anything at NPR, I would like I'd have to like I'd have to suppress this internal scream because I would be so, sometimes I'd be like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, I don't know if you can send me out to like cover, I don't know, this protest, and like I can come back with something that you can use. So it's like a lot of belief in self. But it was through that writers group and having them tell me that it was like acceptable, and good. But then also just reading it so many times over the years and like taking it out of, like defamiliarizing it for myself. So my edit process was just a lot. I would print it out. I would do handwritten notes that way. I would put it on my Kindle so that it would be in like all these different fonts that I could change constantly. I would just change the format so I had no idea what I was looking at. And it was then when I was like, no, I like the writing. Like, I like this writing. I don't really have anything to change. Yeah. I mean, there's more. It was also like I switched agents midway through the process. And the agent who came on mid-project was wonderful and kind of was like, no, this is good. And that made me think, okay, yeah.
Oh, wait, am I supposed to answer?
Yeah, well, I will say, like, the one thing I thought was, I don't care if this book gets panned. I don't care if 2 people buy it. As long as I was able to tell this, like, weird ghost story where my mother is a taxidermied ghost, and I did it in my way, in a way that I found beautiful, then that is okay. And that didn't happen. It was, yeah, it was like, it got lovely reception, and I'm just so grateful. But yeah, how did you know yours was done?
Yikes. I thought I was just asking questions. I didn't think I'd have to answer any. Honestly, I still look at things that I have written in the past that have been published, and I will mentally rearrange the words in my head and think, why did I use that phrase, or why did I use that sentence? And in that way, things still feel unfinished to me. But once I put them out in the world, once I find a home for them and it's in print and other people have read it, like, that's my internal signal that it's time, and I have to like just be comfortable with the fact that I have let it out and it's gone and it's no longer really mine. I think that's the only way that I have felt at peace with anything. Like, nothing's done in my mind, but it's gone.
Yes.
It's not mine.
It's this moment in time. Like, it's that version of me that wrote that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Viv.
Your use of the ghost in a nonfiction story was so intriguing to me, and you mentioned that this character offered you power, and I'm just curious as to how.
Yeah, it allowed me to imagine my mom, right? And I'm sure we've all lost someone. I lost my mom at 13, and I still wonder to this day how she would react in certain situations. And I don't know, right? And I will never know. But allowing her to become a ghost, as she had asked, it feels powerful because it lets me sort of get to know her, even if it is imagined. Yeah. And I think that's actually really lovely. Yeah. Yes.
I was curious about like the quirks and like how you went about like kind of showcasing the quirks of the father character.
Yeah.
Especially because I think like it really stuck with me because the father's like very, frustrating but also so like likable and like so interesting at the same time. And so I was just curious about like how you can go about developing a character that's obviously like in your own life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, my dad would be so happy if he heard you say that. I should have recorded that, and I should like play that for him. Because yeah, how do you shape a character in your real life? It's funny because I didn't think he was funny. Like, I didn't think this book was funny in certain places until after. And this is like what, I don't know if I told this, if I said this to you, but it reminded me of that movie, The Farewell. Has anyone watched that? Yeah, it's really, in my eyes, sad, but I thought it was a hilarious movie. And the director, Lulu Wang, said that when she and Awkwafina and the other actors were watching it for the first time with a live audience, and all of these people were cracking up, like, that movie is about a grandma dying. The actors and the crew were sort of like, what are you guys doing? And so I kind of thought like, okay, I didn't intend for it to be funny until those friends were like, this is a lot. Like, there are some sections that are like, I see the humor, I see the playfulness. I just, to actually answer your question, I just wanted to create or like render my dad with as much care as possible. And it helps that my sisters and our relationship, Like, we will do impressions of my dad. We will do impressions to him. And like, so it's like all sort of like a part of our family dynamic that I wanted to introduce readers to.
So this is a memoir, but it's still with your creative fiction, creative nonfiction. But you do incorporate these more fictional elements with the ghosts and whatnot. But it's still really grounded in the actual story. How did you choose to balance these more imagined elements with the memories?
Yeah. How did I balance the more imagined ones with the memories inside of it? It was a really hard balance, right? Because then I do have like that reported stuff with Jung, and then like I interviewed people about Cuba too, different Asian American studies scholars or different scholars. And so it was all about voice, I think, and tone, right? So creating a voice of having a speaker who could toggle between all of these different modes was really hard. And I think when I walked away from writing this book, I was like, I think I found my writer's voice through this process, which was like the biggest gift this could have given me. It's not how I would write for, like a magazine. It's not how I would have written for NPR, but it feels like me. And so figuring out when to use, a memory to make a point, or an anecdote of like the ghost mom or research was always just like a question of how can I get to this point as quickly and hopefully as elegantly as possible. Thank you. Great questions. Thank you, Jung, for this too. Just really quickly before we head out, I love Jung's novels. If you have not read Shelter or Oh Beautiful, they are wonderful. And Jung is as generous and compassionate as a writer as she is an interviewer. And so I highly recommend reading her work. And I'm very excited for her forthcoming novel.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, everyone.